Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We've had hundreds of people register for this webinar, so it's great to see such an interest. It's a very relevant topic, of course, nowadays with the RICS second edition just having launched. We'll give a couple minutes for people to join in. So today, my name is Steven. I'm the community manager at Click LCA, and I'm joined by my colleague Johanna from our company as well, who is business development manager, and I'm additionally also joined by Fabrizio Varriale. Maybe you guys can give a short introduction about exactly what you are doing at both our company and RICS.
Hello, everyone. I'm Johanna Jarvinen. I look after the UK and Ireland, and as well as the down under market here at Click LCA. Shortly introduction: my background is in construction in UK, which I've been working nearly 20 years now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Fabrizio here, analyst at RICS. I work on a number of things, looking at some policy development in RICS, looking at some sustainability topics, and particularly looking at the development of the built environment carbon database. My own background is architecture and then essentially research on embodied impact of construction products. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Johanna and Fabrizio. So what are we talking about today? So of course we'll do a quick intro on our company, Click LCA. I think most of you attending probably have heard of us. After that, we'll talk about the overview of RICS. So what have we as a company been doing with this standard in the past, and what are we gonna do with it? Also, we'll briefly highlight why we think the second edition is coming. We'll also talk about the changes. So what kind of changes are being brought by the second edition of RICS professional standards, and this will be done by Johanna. We'll also have a preview of the new tool we are going to be launching for this. After that, we'll give the floor to Fabrizio, who will be talking about the BECD database and its role in the RICS second edition. Because for most of you, if you have read the RICS second edition, you'll see it phrased a number of times there. Then we have a time about 15 minutes for the Q&A session. So we have the production team joining us as well. This is consisting of Antti, Laura, and Sean. So if you have any questions for us, you can put them in the Q&A in the chat or the Q&A function if you're either on live Zoom or LinkedIn. And also, of course, we can answer some live during this Q&A. So some of your questions might be reserved for actually answering live if they're significant for everybody, basically. So yeah, as I said, if you're through Livestorm, you can put the questions in the question box. If you're LinkedIn, you can put them in the chat. And no problem if we don't. There's no issue if we don't get to answering all of the questions, because we'll be posting a FAQ after the live event, which will basically have a recap of all the questions. So some key figures about our company. So at the moment we are, I think, at 175 employees. So we have grown quite a lot since we have first offered the first version of the RICS tool. There's over 60,000 projects done with the software. Quite a lot are done with UK based assessments. We are operating in over 150 countries nowadays. Our database consists of over 200,000 data sets. And we have supported, I think, about 20 BIM integrations as of now. And yeah, many of the bigger or biggest, for example, architects and contractors and manufacturers are using our software to do their assessment. So I'll start with the first section of today, snapshot of the current landscape and why the RICS second edition is happening. So myself, I have been with the company since 2018, and incidentally, we have also launched our first RICS compliance tool back then. So the first edition for RICS or RICS launched in November, became effective on 1st of May. So we launched a tool roughly around the same time. Then RICS second edition, of course, launched just quite recently, September 2023, and we will launch a beta tool for that this year in December. And then, of course, the RICS second edition will become effective from the 1st of July next year. So what has kind of happened over this time? So over time, of course, LCA has become much more demanding. The scopes have broadened quite a bit. So what we do in 2019 is that we launched this UK-specific reference region in Carbon Designer to really focus on early phase development to get data out there quickly. In 2020, it was all about expanding the scope. So we expanded, for example, the life cycle scenarios which are available, added the second transport leg. There was a lot of focus on reused elements. So how do we include these to our assessments? Furthermore, we also then integrated the ICE database, which is of course a generic database in the UK, and we made changes to how biogenic carbon was reported, which was of course aligned with the RICS reporting. So then 2021, there came the GLA requirements. So these were a bit different from the RICS requirement, but of course aligned, but it required a new calculation tool. So we launched a new tool for this. This had a number of new things for it. For example, the option to input B2 maintenance emissions. There was the separation of regulated and unregulated energy, the option to classify the A5 and B stages according to RICS, and of course we launched a decarbonization option, which looked at the fact that the energy grid is decarbonizing, which meant that the replacement materials over time, but also the energy emissions, they're not the same as nowadays. There were also, due to this, quite a lot of changes to the results formatting to also make sure it could be pasted into the GLA templates. And we launched a new circularity tool, which was specific to help with the circularity statement in the UK. Then 2022, we made quite a few QLL improvements, but the bigger change to the tools or the calculation method in regards to the RICS assessment was the replacement calculations, where we made the change to also include the waste and the transportation of replacements and not just the material replacements. So then we got to this year. Of course, last year in July, we got the starting of the Plus A2 standard, so the 15804, which basically made it mandatory for manufacturers to report a different standard of data from that date going forward, which meant there was a lot of data that suddenly was not allowed or was not possible to be used in the assessments in the UK. So we created a new tool which ensured that also the manufacturers publishing their latest form of data according to the Plus A2 standard was able to be used. And of course, we had the new results export for circularity, since there were some changes to this template. And on the results, we could then report the emissions per square meter. Then there was a small change, which was also kind of coming from RICS 2 already, the scenarios for B2 and B3. So both in the existing tool and the new one, which we're getting, you can now use these scenarios. As we mentioned in the earlier slide, December is the launch of our beta tool, but the targeted release of the RICS second edition will be Q1, so well on time before it becomes mandatory to use. So then considerations. So over the, let's say, last 5 years that we have been involved in RICS assessments and GLA assessments, we are seeing that the assessments are becoming far more comprehensive. Secondly, also the support queries related to them are getting more complex, which is of course a good thing because people try to get far more done. People are no longer just trying to get the assessment done, but they're really focusing on reducing the emissions. So it's become a far higher priority. And also clients, we see that they go far beyond the existing RICS guidance, trying to offer more to their clients with their assessments. However, a lot is still open to interpretation if we should add this or if we should add that, and therefore we need the official guidance, which we are getting from the RICS second edition, which is great. So then some results over the last 5 years. So we have almost 15,000 projects done with the RICS tools, so quite a lot. Of course, that is fueled by all of you joining us. Over the last 5 years, we have also had over 5,000 support queries related to RICS and GLA. In our internal Carbon Heroes benchmark program, we have over 735 validated projects. And I put a little asterisk there because validated for us means that it is complete project data. So we cannot include projects if they, for example, are missing the foundation or so on. And I also posted there some average emissions. So for example, for all of our UK validated projects, the average emissions were 667 kilograms per CO2 per square meter. And then I took a small exempt there from the offices, including MEP, we're at 722, and without it's 616. So quite big numbers there. So then all our that was kind of the recap of what we have been doing with RICS and the results from it for the last 5 years. So I'll now hand over the floor to Johanna, who will be talking about the key changes and then also highlighting what this actually means for you in One-Click LCA. So I hand the floor to you.
Right. Okay. If you then move on for the next slide, which has the key changes. I think we are providing the slides to everyone who joined today. So, I mean, you don't need to read everything now, but there is some key things, like obviously the whole entire asset life cycle needs to be included. And the new thing there is that there is also guidance now for how to approach the infrastructure. So infrastructure work should be also included, if it's on its own or if it's a part of the larger development. It also aligns now with the cost management standards, third edition, and obviously the BEC database that Fabrizio will talk later, so I'm not going into that. It incorporates latest industry definitions, so the carbon terminology has been aligned with LETI and the other work that's been going on to making sure that everyone talks about the same things and defines them the same way. And there's also a big push for uncertainty, because obviously people tend to do their own conclusions and assumptions. So there is quite a lot of guidance around how that is gonna go. And it also includes greater detail of carbon data sources and conversion factors. So there is also that quality side of things on the uncertainty and also the data source side. We can move then on. Then there is some new stages. I mean, they kind of not new. That's why they're in new stages. A0 is pre-construction stage. That's been on the infrastructure assessment if you have done one like many years, and it will still mainly affect the infrastructure projects. The A0 is typically not that significant in the building side of things. The B8 also, again, that has been a part of infrastructure. It covers the user activities, and then the D has been split in two, so it's D1 and D2 there. So still beyond life issues, but they have been split into more particular stages. Next one, please. Obviously, it's not like the RICS doesn't try to invent the wheel. It just more emphasizes the practical implementation of the current EN and ISO standards. So it's a framework mainly to make it more UK content, and so everyone can use it similar way and assumptions and so on. So all the key standards still are behind the guide. So it's not like excluding any of these. It's definitely has all them written in. It's all more for UK content, saying that obviously there is ways of use it elsewhere in the world, which I think quite a few places its RICS guidance has been already used. And then when you should apply it, there is more stricter guidance also when and how, and some maybe new uses. So obviously new construction, new build, assessed big or small. There is some other guidance for small assets that simplifies it a little bit. Demolition of existing, construction of new assets. So the demolition is now a key part of it. You could use it in retrofit and refurbishments, and also master plan scenarios. Also fit out and build assets, and then the infrastructure is obviously a big thing, and the civil engineering works also. So there is some more guidance around how to approach these. Next here, and then there's also more guidance when you should undertake. This is nothing new. I think these are the 4 stages we would recommend always doing it anyway, but I think the EN standard also says so. However, obviously there is different versions, like a pre-am assessment, you only do it in concept design and technical design. GLA, you do concept and technical and post-completion phase. So, but it's good to keep the check-in. So keep on doing in 4 stages. It's at least, obviously, if you do more, it's also fine. But in minimum on these 4 stages, the assessment should be done. And the new things that give more guidance now is how to use it in use and end-of-life assessment. So not just thinking about what it's going to be, but also you could use it in use phase. So how much energy, water you use, the user transport, and so on. And also do a life cycle assessment for deconstruction. So different scenarios and so on. So there is also further use for LCAs explained. And the framework as a general has also some changes. There's some terminology changes, like the calculation period has now been renamed as reference study period. It's like no change there really. 60 years is typical, and then 20 and 60 years for fit out, and then 120 years for infrastructure. There has been also said that if you are doing residential building, the domestic envelope should be also calculate 120-year assessment. It was kind of decision made. It's not necessarily based on any more further than the discussions around the table that it's good to build for longevity, especially residential. And the whole life carbon assessment should consider all construction works, so including the demolition and deconstruction, the facilitation works and preparation of building. So make it more than just the building itself. The element categories for infrastructure are based on the AEC MS3, and obviously the building is still the RICS categories. And then the confirmation that BIM models are now like also a good source of information. Before it was really cost plan heavy, and people were a bit nervous to using BIM models, but now it's definitely also written in there that they are good source of information. If they are obviously good models, then to use them. And then there's also industry guidance like the TM65 and other iStruct data. It's validated source of data where relevant to be used, obviously with quality controls around there. And then there's 2 assumption methods coming up. I don't know if Fabrizio is going to touch on this, but they are going to be completely reliant on the submissions to the BECD database. So more people do assessment and more they submit to the BECD, then more useful these asset level benchmarks and can become and can be used early stages for making assumptions. So they obviously not sure how many there is at the moment, but more people can submit, more relevant it comes, and more obviously useful as well, and more real. And then use of scenarios is also being provided. So now you don't need to maybe write so much around what you have done. It just basically offers you reasonable scenario based for early stages. So obviously early stage phases, a lot of things can still change, and it's you might not have a proper drawings even, and you don't know where anyone buys anything. So more generic data, more default specification has to be used. Then obviously technical design, it can come a little bit more relevant, and whereas post completion, it should be really much as-built data being used everywhere. You shouldn't have no reason not to be used that. So make it more relevant for this as you go on to actual building. Next one. And then the new thing is the uncertainty. There's been a lot of discussion to date how we can be sure that what the assumptions been, how people have calculated it, how's the data being selected. Have you just always selected the lowest generic data point and keep on using it, even that's not been applied? So there is a few things that's been safeguarding this. So consistency factor, so based on the project phase, so what to include, and obviously certainty regarding design of the asset, and quantities and materials used, so you don't really necessarily know. And carbon data uncertainty factors, so more generic data is more will get penalized. And also if it's like, let's say, self-declared like TM65, obviously that's uncertainty factor will be higher than third-party verified EBD. So there will be quality issues there, and then the quantity uncertainty factor as well. So it's obviously expected that the quantities will be a little bit less accurate on the early stages, whereas as built there should be pretty much there. Like there shouldn't be any reason why not. So, and these three together will then give you the whole life carbon uncertainty factor. So it's a percentage of everything, and then you have to add this to your submission sheet to see that what is the uncertainty factor, and that will be then reflected the carbon footprint of your building there. There's other factors obviously around biogenic carbon. There's some changes there, which I don't gotta go too much into it, but it's the same. It's going to be reported as a separately. And then there is also some LULUC land use and change metrics. And then obviously the energy use for the building should be always done in a predictive energy modeling. If it's not available there, it might be some other ways, but typically I would say at least larger developments always will have energy modeling for quite early stages done, so it actually meets the building regulations. And carbonization as well, so should be always included. So there is a standard EN 16757. If you don't have the figures, you can obviously, there is a guidance how to also calculate the carbonization and which one you should apply it to. And the grid material decarbonization, which GLA kind of brought in and then took it off as a like a not mandatory item to report, is now more defined. So it actually tells which stages, which modules you should decarbonize and how. So there is some guidance more when and also infrastructure has a set of rules. So it's quite like a well defined. So it should be maybe more clear to how to decarbonization then will work, and how the results should be presented. Next there.
Yeah.
And then just to say that we obviously will help you out on this. And we have bought a tool. Obviously, as you probably understand, the tool development takes some time and more complicated factors and things you have to put in. There will be obviously some testing time and some coding time available. So we obviously did start this whole process when the draft came out. And then we had to wait, obviously, get the actual guidance out in September, because there was a lot of changes, a lot of consultation responses received, and we were being all tool manufacturers or developers have been kept up to date what is what their plan is. So we've been quite well consulted this time around. Currently, it's in internal testing. It will go out as a beta release. So we have some lovely clients has promised to have a little play around. So they will do some tests and see how it works for them, and then provide us feedback by end of the month, so we can then get it out for you in Q1, which means between January and March. I can't give you exact date, but by end of March, it definitely will be out. So this is kind of typical how we develop tools. There is things that we obviously included there, like the RICS reporting requirements have changed, so that will all be revamped in there. The new end-of-life scenarios will be applied, so you don't need to do these things manually. And the non-decarbonized and carbonized scenarios will be included. So again, the rules will be applied in the back end of the tool, so you don't need to do them yourself. there will be a whole lot of transportation profiles for the B8 if wanted to be calculated. The default scenarios, in addition to B2 and 3, there was BA5 and C1. So there's demolition and so on. And then the consistency factor will be added to the data and user inputs to make your life a little bit easier, because obviously if you have lots of materials, the factors are quite tedious to calculate. And then obviously ultimate report generation will be also provided as relevant. And so we have had to put this a little bit in stages. So the first release, which is, like I said, Q1, has certain things like the maintenance repair scenarios and the pre-construction work inputs available, as well as next one, different scenarios for the C1. So there will be more like demolition scenarios, and also various worker transportation options for calculating the B8 then. And then for following on the Q1 and 2, we will then continue with the automated reporting for the RICS submission and also the BECD project database. So then you can add more data in the database to get good benchmarks, and the consistency factors will be added. And also we have 2 infrastructure tools now called PAS 2080 and EN 17472. They will be also updated in line with the RICS professional statement version 2, where relevant, or I think there will be probably actually a new tool for it. But in sense, we will have an infrastructure tool also complying with the RICS version 2 there. And I think that's my part done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Johanna. Very good to see this overview. And of course, most of these things we already briefly spotlighted are already in our beta tool. But as Johanna said, we will be releasing this to the general audience during Q1. So before we switch to the hot topic of the BECD database, we'll have one poll question. So that is coming up now, and this is of course related to our RICS tool. So the question there is, would you like a free consultation with Click LCA? If you are watching from Livestorm, you should have a poll coming up, and you can answer that very easily. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live, you can add a comment to the chat box, and we will get back to you on that shortly. So then we are going to the next topic of today's session. So BECD database. So everybody has had lots of questions around this already. So Fabrizio is here to answer all of these and more. So we had one question from Fabrizio related to the BECD database that he wants to ask specifically to you, our audience. So there should again be a poll coming up. And the question is, what is the main barrier hindering you from publicly sharing the results of your building LCA? So Fabrizio, welcome to the stage. So I think I read somewhere that there's about 50 published results now. So what do you think is the barrier from people sharing their results?
Thanks. I guess that we want to know through this question. So probably the one that we are most concerned from a legal point of view is the fact that project data the IP of the project data, intellectual property, might reside with the client, and the client might not be happy to share with it, or might just not be prepared to share with it. Or it may be in a situation where part of the data IP sits with the client, part of the data IP sits with the consultant, and so maybe the consultant is happy to share their data, but not the data which sits on the client. It may also be the case that somebody wants to share something of the results of an assessment that they have done maybe 2 years ago, and at that point, the client has moved on, the consultant has moved on, but they kept that data for internal benchmarking purposes. So one of the one of the main barriers, I would say. It's this one, and it's particularly tricky because it's not a technical issue that you can
Yep.
let's throw some resources at this. It needs to be thought, and it needs to be in a way that needs to be a bit of to be aware that there is need for this data to be shared, and it is a good thing to share the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think we've had a couple of these kind of cases in the past on our side, so it could very well be. So yeah, to the audience, please fill in the question. Let us know what is the reason, and basically based on this, Fabrizio can work on making the BECD database even better. So then we'll skip, or we'll head towards your part of the presentation. So I'll just do the slides just like we did with Johanna. So tell me when you want the next one, and I'll put them forward for you.
Yes, thanks, Steven, and thanks for having me here and having giving me the opportunity to talk about BECD. So I'll be talking about what BECD is, kind of how it came about, and what the plan is for the future. First, I want to say that BECD is a initiative which is effectively in its development led by RICS as well as BCIS, but also by all the other professional bodies and organizations that you see below there. Those are the ones that form the steering group and the one that throw their full support behind the BECD initiative, which is a not a commercial initiative. So it's not a commercial product. It's something that we wanted to do, and we are doing for the good of the industry and to progress the decarbonization agenda. If you could go to the next one, thank you. So in terms of background, where it's coming about, RICS used to have an embodied carbon database, which we inherited from a previous body. It was developed even before the old professional standard came out, so it wasn't really fit for purpose. We did some industry engagement essentially now 3 years ago to understand what were the industry needs, and out of that came the concept of BECD and the idea that we wouldn't be just an RICS thing, but something that it's backed and supported by all those industry bodies. So the objective is effectively to establish the official UK repository for whole life carbon data on the built environment, and that means that it's going to help to harmonize and set data, increase the availability of free data, as well as the transparency and the quality of the data that's out there. And we are doing this in collaboration with the people that are behind the professional statement. That's the old name, the new professional standard, meaning the authors. Effectively, there's also some overlap. Some people who are the authors also sit on the BECD steering group, as well as there's quite a good degree of overlap with the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. So I'm part of that group as RCS representative. Some of the authors of the standards are also in there, and some of the people also help us develop the BECD reporting templates, essentially. If you could move to the next one, thank you. So as I was saying, BECD is a data repository and a reporting platform. It is not an assessment tool, and it never will be. So it's not doing the job of Click LCA or any other tool. It's a place where once you've done your assessment, you come and report your data. The idea is that it will be able to talk to other software applications, and so we'll work to streamline that. Excuse me, that the ability to talk, and that the raw data is always free to download, and it is. Now, BECD is effectively two separate databases, entirely separate database. BECD assets or projects is the one that holds the results of project level carbon assessment. The one that we've been talking so far covers in both in buildings and infrastructure, as well as embodied carbon and operational carbon. And then we got BECD products, which is effectively an index of EPDs and other product lifecycle assessment. The idea there is that we just bring together sources that are in different places, and we also offer a place for new data to get visibility, essentially. And I will be talking a little bit about that, but mostly about the asset database. Next one, please. So the BECD asset, was saying it contains and provides you the place to report the results of your project level carbon assessment. The current version of BECD, which is launched in October. And it's aligned with the first edition of the professional standard because that's the one that is still in force effectively. So through that system, we collect embodied and or operational carbon. We also collect a lot of non-carbon data points effectively that are useful for specific benchmarking. Things like, of course, what type of building it is, where it is located, how big it is, what kind of technology have gone into the facade, what is the structure made of, this sort of things. And we're able to track the carbon results as the project progresses because of the way that we structure the database. So in that diagram, you see that effectively, so the first object that you create is that blue blob, the asset, to which you attach a bunch of asset information, things like what type of building it is, where it's located. And then to that asset, you attach several assessments with the idea that if you're starting the project on an early stage, you'll do an assessment on an early stage, you'll do another one later, another post-completion, and even in use, you can report your operational energy and carbon based on the meter energy use against the same asset. And so we know that all these assessments are for that asset. And when I say asset, it's a building or a piece of it. And for each assessment, it's contained a bunch of assessment information, things like what's the scope, what's the date, what's included, etc. And then you can enter your embodied carbon and your operational energy and carbon. Then we also have a little object that sits above the asset called a complex, which is effectively just a way to group different assets within the same boundary. So similar approach is taken in the professional standard, where it tells you that if you have a development and you have several buildings or pieces of infrastructure as part of the same development, you're meant to assess them separately as single units and then put them together at the end, effectively. And that's where the complex object comes from. Next one, please.
So for the next one, Fabrizio is going to talk about entering the data, but we just also got the poll results. So the number one concern was actually the concerns related to disclosing the client data or commercially sensitive data, which is of course a really valid question. But actually 10% of the vote were related to people not being aware how they can enter the data or how they can share it. So that question we can answer directly right now, which is good. So
yeah, the idea of BECD is it gives you the place where you can freely report that data, and you don't have to use maybe your own. There's companies, consultants that have their own databases and they release part of that to the public, but the idea is that BECD is one place for everybody. So that list there is just the idea that the way you enter the data for a project is fairly straightforward. You first go in, you create the asset, you enter its information, then you create the first assessment that's attached to that. You enter the information, you can attach the publishing mode, of which I will speak in the next slide, I believe. And then you can unlock your embodied carbon reporting, as well as unlock the operational carbon reporting. So the two are separate. So as we know, people not necessarily do the two of them together. So you enter the data and then you finally publish the assessment, which means you make it public effectively. Next one, please. So yes, publishing an assessment means that the data that you've entered so far, it goes from a draft mode that is visible only to you as the original user. It then becomes visible to the other users, and then they can download it. So it's important that before you publish, you make sure that what you've entered is correct. You cannot edit that information once it's published. You cannot edit it straight away. You, within BECD, click on a button, request to the admin that the project be brought back to a draft stage. And if there is a valid reason, we're happy to do that. That is to avoid that somebody enters a project, publishes it, and then, oh, I made a mistake, put it back in. And that, so that the kind of the pool of data is a bit fluctuating. But it's effectively just from draft to finalized project. And as I was saying, you could publish in two different modes, and that's up to you to choose. The one that we call full visibility means that all the information that you've entered about the assessment and the asset that sits above it, it's visible to the other user, not obviously except things that are protected by GDPR, like personal email addresses. It means that all that information that you've entered, all the project dimensions, will be visible to the other users when they download the expo file, which I will talk about. Now that's fine. You can still pretty much anonymize those projects. Effectively, if you're publishing something about an office, you don't have to give it the actual name. You just call it office. And you don't have necessarily to disclose the precise location in the UK. So if you set your building to be in the UK, you can tell us the first part of the postcode, which kind of gives you an area where that is, but you can also choose not to disclose it. So unless it is a very particular building that it's, that can be understood what it is by just looking at its dimensions. If it is an office building or a house, you can pretty much make it anonymous in that way. But to kind of cater for that issue and concern about the client disclosing their own project, there is also an anonymized mode of publishing, which means that everything that you've entered, it won't be visible to the normal user. It will be visible to the admin of BCD, and we will make use of that for benchmarks, effectively, for statistical analysis. And that leads me to the next slide. Thank you. That means that, so the purpose of this, of course, is to provide data to the industry. And that means that at an early stage, you'll eventually be able to look at BCD, produce some specific benchmarks for your project. For example, I want to see what is the typical embodied carbon A1 to A3 in a residential unit that uses steel as the structural frame. So there's a lot of data points that you can use to kind of slice the cake the way you want it. And you'll do that initially through the CSV file that you can download that effectively contains, as I was saying, everything that's in there. You can do that analysis on your own. There's just be an upcoming guidance on the file structure, which is effectively a big Excel file with a lot of columns, and there'll be guidance on what each of the column means. But also we as BCD, we will be periodically releasing our own statistical analysis. And that means that we'll be making use of the projects that are fully visible to other users, but also the ones that are published in anonymized mode. And so that's the idea that, if you're a large consultant, you have your own resources to do the analysis from the raw data, but able to use marks which are released by BCD periodically. And so, as I was saying, with those mentioned marks, what do you do? At an early stage, as the professional standard tells you, you can use them as proxies to kind of estimate what your building will be in terms of embodied carbon as well as operational carbon. You'll be able to say, okay, this is the type of projects that I'm working on. I'm looking to build 50 housing units. This is the kind of embodied carbon that I can expect it to be as a range. But then at a later stage, you can use the BCD benchmarks to effectively compare the performance of your building against peers, against similar buildings. And because we give them people the way to slice the cake in very specific ways, you can, select that pool of comparison with detail. At the moment, we've got about 50 assessments published so far. A lot of those are from actual infrastructure projects that have been shared with us by McDonald. We'll continue to collaborate with them. Those data sets will be improved as the new professional standard comes into place. And there's also several projects which are kind of like waiting to be published. Those were entered about a year ago, where we had a beta version that we used to kind of test things and also collect data for the net zero carbon building standard. So the project that have been entered, but we brought them back to a draft stage so that people can go in, make sure with the user agreement, and put them back into a visible status. Next one, please. So just incidentally, on BCD products, as I was saying, it is an entirely separate part of BECD. It is a catalog or an index, if you want, of LCAs for construction products and works that we'll have in the future. The idea is that you just bring together different sources that exist, like Ecopoto, other EPDs, DIC, benchmarks, academic LCA, professional LCAs, as well as paid databases that are not visible at the moment. The idea is that we keep basic information about each LCA record, maybe 20-something data points, so that you can easily seek, essentially, through a search of the record or filter. You can see, oh, what is out there for concrete? What is out there for a particular construction work? And we also have the possibility for people to submit their LCA results. So if, for example, a professional has done an LCA on a particular product, which is not an EPD, but they want to share that, they can do that. Or an academic has done a paper with a particular study, they can share that. And with the paid databases, we'll be able to tell you, oh, for example, BRE impact, they have values for this particular product. We won't be able to release you the carbon figure, but we'll be able to tell you they have records for those type of products, which at the moment you're not able to know. And we're building this, and it keeps on going, and it will be integrated with more data as time moves along. We are working this in close collaboration with Circular Ecology, which is Craig Jones, the person that is behind the IC database. And the idea is that eventually BECD will become kind of a live version of the ICE database, which is at the moment, as you know, an Excel spreadsheet. Next one, please. So we had quite a few development challenges with BECD. I won't go into the details. I think one of the key bits with BECD asset is trying to find a balance between high data granularity, asking a lot of questions about the projects, but also on the other side is of reporting. If I ask a lot of things, people need to take more time to fill in the form, and so they're maybe not as incentivized to share the data. But otherwise, on the other side, if I don't have much information about the projects, it's difficult to benchmark it with and to produce those benchmarks. We also lack effectively, and this is an industry problem, a standardized data schema to exchange carbon data at the project level. So, you know, we have that for EPDs, we have open EPDs, we have ILCD plus EPD. We don't have that yet for carbon project level carbon assessment. And so that's an issue. And BECD products, different type of challenges is mostly populating and building it up is quite intensive. Next one, please. I believe this is the penultimate slide. I just want to say that, yes, we launched BECD, both assets and products. They're in the same portal. You can access them now if you go to becd.co.uk. And we are now working effectively to align the reporting framework with the new professional standard of our RICS. That means that by the time that comes into effect in July, the reporting framework will have changed. You'll be still able to report according to the old one, because you might report all the projects, but you also be able to report according to the new one, and that will be a choice of the user. And that means implementing different formats of essentially the carbon data entering for infrastructure versus building, having a different level of details in the building elements depending on which project stage you are, which also comes from the professional standard. We'll be also looking to report material quantities and carbon factor, which is not currently in the system. So next one, please. That's my last slide. And it's just to say, so please go on, visit BECD, create an account. It's free, and you can start kind of playing around with it. There is guidance available on the website. There's some tutorial videos, a PDF file with kind of screenshot that tells you how to go through. There's also an FAQ section in there, and there is an email, of course, for the technical support. But also you can email me directly if you want to talk about engaging with the initiative, collaborating, or if you just kind of want to know more about how it might work. And that's it. Thank you very much. And back to you, Steven.
Thank you for that, Fabrizio. That's great insight. So hopefully now everybody understands a little bit more about what BECD is and how we'll be able to actually implement these type of results in the RICS 2 assessments. So now we have time for some Q&A session. I think maybe I skipped the Q&A slide, but anyway, we are here to answer your questions. As we said earlier, you can put in live from the questions in the Q&A part. In LinkedIn Live, you could just put them in the chat. So I'm guessing that we'll have some questions coming up. So we have here one question. Please, could you elaborate on the RSP for fit-out projects for the 20 and 60 years? Is this product dependent? To date, we have been using 60 years. Johanna, do you want to answer this one?
Not product dependent, no, it's just the whole building. So you would calculate the carbon just to using the 20-year life and then also 60 years life. I mean, obviously some fit-out project won't last even 10 years necessarily if it's a retail fit-out. So it's just to try to get the carbon figure for shorter life, which they normally probably are if they actively use, like offices get refitted all the time, whereas obviously houses might not be in that sort of turnaround. So you can obviously then see like that maybe it's good to use low carbon materials to start with instead of since the longevity is necessary, not the issue there.
Thank you very much for answering that. Just to quickly really highlight, if there are questions we are not answering right now, we will answer them later and post the FAQ. So don't worry if your question doesn't get answered right now, we will answer them and share the details with you later. Question here, what to cover in A0 from Harsh Maru?
It's like a site surveys and things like that, which is exactly the reason why it's not that big on the building project, whereas infrastructure, you might need to do a lot of drilling and take a lot of samples and whatnot. So site surveys, anything to do with site setup, basically. You find the definition in the guide as well.
Bit longer question here. The latest RICS guidance now also includes supporting Excel reporting templates. Will the updated One-Click LCA tool be aligned to easily facilitate the completion of the specific RICS templates? I can answer that one. Yes, it will be. Obviously, we are always trying to make our tools as easy to use as possible and our results output always aligned with whatever requirements are set by the tool. So our new RICS tool will have results report aligned with these templates and hopefully make them as easy as possible. I think they're maybe a little bit easier to populate than the GLI ones.
And if I can add to that, a BECD will also align with those reporting templates. So the idea is that, you use One-Click LCA, you produce those templates, and then you feed them into BECD directly.
Indeed. There is here a question, will there be an integration with TM65? We have had a few occasions where we made calculations using TM65, but struggled how this would integrate with One-Click. TM65, of course, doesn't have a specific database. There's no place where TM65 data is collected, but we are integrating TM65 data to the platform. Johanna, maybe you have a bit more insight on this than me, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, TM65 is obviously just self-declared stuff, so they typically are on people's websites, like Mitsubishi has a website for it. So it's not like a publishing body database that we would take them. So as some MEP manufacturers obviously be more forward-coming and actually actively want us to publish it, others are not. But we have a whole program supporting to get more TM65 data in our 56 data on the platform. Not only for RICS purposes, but we also have just launched the MEP tool, which then will greatly benefit for the data there.
Question then for Fabrizio. Does the BECD process align with the UK GBC net zero verification requirements? And if so, how would that work?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Effectively, the net zero carbon bill standard verification, it's still kind of in development, the way that will be done. But BECD will most likely, and essentially I'm saying 99%, will provide the infrastructure that you need to report your carbon figures that you need to report for the standard. So embodied carbon and then operational carbon. Now the verification itself, it's something that will need to be done by a professional, and so not by BECD in itself, but BECD will provide you the place where you report that as an official way to report for the standard. Yes.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Then we have the next question. Is user carbon activity for the RICS LCA standard a requirement to report, or is it an option? Johanna?
Oh, the user carbon option is
B8.
it is a it is not mandatory as far as I remember. It is there to like a optional item, and especially I think it can be quite hard to put it there on the start of the project. But if you obviously do in use assessments, you could let's say some, I don't know, drive-through restaurant or something, then that could be quite important to take into account. Whereas maybe some residential development, it's not that important. People like come and go to the house, but some activities that has sort of transportation around it, that like a transport hub or something could be good to always add it.
Yeah, that's a good point relating to transport, because in Norway, for example, user carbon B8 has been already reported for a while, part of the NS 3720, and it can be a very significant part of your emissions. So definitely worth including if you have the data for it. Just waiting for the next question to be pulled there. Maybe if we don't have one yet, I could pass a question to Fabrizio related to the data that we're putting into the BECD. Is there any type of validation process for this kind of data, or are we just trusting users?
So in short, no, because we're not a verifier of carbon assessment results. We don't have the resources first, and neither we have the authority in a sense to do that. The concept is that we give the user, which sits at the other end, so not the one that's entering the data, but the one that wants to use that data to do a benchmark, to do a study. We give them all the information that they need to make their own judgment about which projects effectively they want to include in their pool. So you'll be able to say, I want to look at only early stage, I want to look at only late stage projects, I want to look only at projects that have been third-party verified, because that's one of the things that you can enter about a project. So you'll be able to select your pool of buildings that you want to benchmarks against with effectively. And that with the new professional standard, with those uncertainty factors, that's additional data points that you'll be used to kind of restrict your pool of projects that you want to look at. So you can say, you know, out of 100 projects, maybe I only want to look at the ones that have an uncertainty factor below a certain threshold, because I know those ones will be more accurate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it was a question that we've had a couple customers asking us, but of course it makes complete sense with resource.
No, it's a question that always comes up, and you know, we effectively, there is no verification that we were able to. So we'll do kind of basic checks in terms of outliers. Certain point, you know, if a project comes in and its carbon values are way off the chart, then we'll be able to say, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah,
we can contact the original user and maybe, you know, try and check it, but not.
Yeah. We have one more question coming in, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up. But as I said earlier, we will publish all the questions plus the answers in our FAQ that will be shared later, so your question will not be missed. So there is here a comment or a question from Richard. Letty notes an average design value of E-, which is 1400 kilograms CO2 per square meters. Any insight as to why these Letty figures are much higher to what is shown in the One Click LCA database? I think
different scope.
the scope for sure, but I think also if I recall from the last Carbon Expert Summit in London that they had to just get the figure starting somewhere. Wasn't that right?
Yeah, and also the scope of ours misses out A5, B1 to 3, and obviously B6 and 7 missed both of them. So the scope of Carbon Heroes in One Click LCA is different scope. Like it's just not the same. You can't compare them. Right?
Yeah, of course. If we add A5 and B1 to 1 to 3, it won't suddenly be 1400. I mean, we are capturing in our own internal benchmark A1 to A4. Then we have B4, B5, the replacements, of course, and we're talking about end of life, so C1 to C4. So it captures quite a lot. Why they're different from the LETIs by this much of a margin, I really don't know. We have quite a lot of projects backing our results. I don't know what is the how do you say, the amount of projects that the LETI benchmarks are based on.
Yeah, I think they were whatever they got was the highest were the E, and then the A and A pluses are like aspirational, if I remember right.
Yeah. Alrighty, so that will be it for today. As I said, the questions that haven't gotten answered, we will answer them and we will share the FAQ later. So thank you all very much for joining. Thank you for speaking, Johanna and Fabrizio. It was great to have an insight into what we are going to be doing with RICS second edition, how people can prepare for it, and especially how we can include the BECD database and the data from this. So to the speakers, please stay here for a little bit, but to the others, thank you very much for joining today.